Welcome to the Winged Wheel Podcast. Here to talk all things hockey are your hosts, Brad Crisco, Ryan Hanna, and Evan Lobsinger.
What's the word for like the middle of the offseason? Like the middle of the NHL offseason? Because that's where I feel...
Solstice?
Yeah, like the hockey solstice. Hockey offseason solstice. Definitely there's people who know the proper way to use the word solstice who are rolling their eyes right now. Like, wow, these guys are 5 seconds in already screwing something up.
And they're probably like, well, according to when the first game of the season is in the NHL and when the last playoff game was, it's actually what the solstice was 3 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Like, shut up.
You morons. Quote tweet us, dunk on us. I promise you, maybe one of us will see it. But yeah, first of all, July 30th. How? Secondly, this feels like the deepest part of the hockey offseason valley.
Actually, you can't tweet at me anymore. I can't even say that word.
I have to, excrete at you? Is that what they're calling it now?
Yeah, I don't know.
Oh, that was unsettling.
Yes.
I was going to say you have to X at me, but that sounds way worse.
I have to so whatever, man. I don't care.
And I haven't updated. I've been putting off updating that app. Am I screwed when I do?
Mine just did it automatically.
It's the same thing.
So is it just staggered?
Yeah.
Because I still have Twitter, which is nice.
Mine says X. I don't care. It doesn't matter. It still causes me the same pain every time I load it up. But
yeah, it's awful. And until Threads gets an actual following page, that's borderline unusable.
I've said it a million times. I'll say it again. Wherever hockey discourse is where we'll be.
Yes.
I would just like for it to be one place. I am but one man, and between, Twitter, Threads, and Blue Sky, I'm like, oh, please, God, I just want to manage one social media account. Well, if you didn't believe us when we said it's a hockey offseason, that should be sad enough. Folks, welcome to the Winged Wheel Podcast, here to talk to you about all things Detroit Red Wings hockey, the world of the NHL, and more. I am one of your hosts, Ryan Hanna.
I'm Brad Crisco.
And I'm Evan.
On this episode of the Winged Wheel Podcast, we're going to bring you some assorted NHL news. Patrice Bergeron retired. Sebastian Aho signed a long-term contract. Some people making snide remarks about the Toronto Maple Leafs. Shocker. Because their goaltender, Murray, went on LTIR. Logan Cooley turns things around and actually doesn't go back to the NCAA and signs his NHL contract. Vladimir Tarasenko just suddenly became an Ottawa Senator. And then after that, we'll talk about a conversation that's been, speaking of Twitter/X, floating around since the DeBrincat trade happened, which is where's Detroit and where's Ottawa? And we'll lump in Buffalo and Montreal there just to evaluate where those teams are at. We'll talk about some Red Wings notes like Veleno being unsigned, and we'll see what else we get into before overtime. Before that, I want to let you know a couple things. First of all, this podcast is almost entirely supported by our Patreon supporters. Patreon.com/wingedwheelpodcast. If you want to join the Dub Club, you get access to a lot of really great benefits. First of all, you get access to our Patreon exclusive overtime episodes, which record and post right after these main episodes. We let loose, have fun, answer any questions that we didn't get to in the main show. Generally, just have a good time. You also get access to our Patreon exclusive Discord community, and you're also entered into all of our giveaways. For example, last season we gave away 2 tickets to every Detroit Red Wings home game. The vast majority go into our Patreon supporters, and we're going to do the same this year. And we also just gave away an Alex DeBrincat jersey, so that's what you can look forward to. In addition to supporting us on Patreon, I also want to let you know about the Roast and Toast of Thomas Holmstrom and Nicholas Lidstrom on Saturday, August 26th at 5:30 p.m., presented by Trinity Health, hosted at Motor City Casino in Detroit. It's going to be a great time. There's a lot of laughs to be had. Host Mike/Doc Emmerich, Chris Draper, Ian Bagg, Steve Ott, and Jim Ralph will lead those laughs and entertainment. There's 2 levels of tickets. The champion ticket gets you cocktails and hors d'oeuvres, the dinner, the auction, the roast and toast, of course. You're going to be rubbing shoulders with NHLers, people in the industry. You'll see us there, I hope. So go to jamiedanielsfoundation.org to get your tickets and get them soon before they run out. Okay, let's start with the news that was biggest across the NHL. And this is one that people saw coming for a little while now. It was actually a little bit surprising that it happened this offseason and not the previous one. But Patrice Bergeron, longtime Boston Bruin, of course, finally called it a career. Almost 1,300 games, 427 goals, 613 assists, 1,040 points, and most notably 6 Selke trophies. I don't say this lightly. Pavel Datsyuk is one of my favorite players of all time. But if there's ever anyone in the game who has a trophy to be named after him in the future, Patrice Bergeron and the Selke might be one down the road.
Oh, yeah, 1,000%. This is one of those very conflicting days in the hockey world, or the day it was announced, because as a fan of a team in the Atlantic, I'm ecstatic. Getting Patrice Bergeron the hell out of the Atlantic in any means necessary is a huge win for the other 7 teams in that division. Having to play against him constantly and his defensive prowess was always a pain. But as a fan of hockey and a hockey appreciator, it's a very somber day because you can appreciate the talent and the nuance that a player like Patrice Bergeron brought to the game.
I can't believe he only had 6 Selkies. It felt like every single year he won it. And it was just like, well, why even vote this year? Patrice Bergeron's winning again.
Well, part of his career overlapped with Datsyuk.
Yeah.
He probably has a case for 1 or 2 more in there as well.
100%.
And the fact that he was able to do it so effectively so late into his career, like even last season, it's not like he was over the hill. 58 points in 78 games. Like, really, he could have kept going and been productive. Mind you, he did talk a lot about the reality of the game playing at 38 years old.
He's had some hard miles, too.
Yeah.
Didn't he play a cup final with like a collapsed lung and a separated shoulder?
Something like that, yeah. Fractured spleen, like just one of those guys who's an absolute warrior. And he talked about, like, yeah, he can go out there and play and produce, but it got harder to lace up the skates. No longer was it just, you go out the night before, you get 6 hours of sleep, and then you hop on the ice the next day. Like, at that age, to play the kind of game he plays, there's a lot of preparation that goes into that, and you just ran out of steam. And you kind of saw it with the Bruins. Like, those guys got together, and it felt very much like they all agreed, like, one last ride this year. And by all rights, after the regular season that they had, it looked like they put together the best shot they had for one last ride. And again, as a fan of a rival team in the Atlantic, and rival might be a bit rich considering where Boston is and where Detroit is, it was funny to watch from the outside. But for Bergeron, it's like how this guy walks away with only 1 Stanley Cup. Like, it's a team. If you ever want an indication that it's a team sport, statistics like that, like Patrice Bergeron, with all of his success over his entire career, just 1 Stanley Cup, like, that's a guy who, the way he played, you'd think he'd have 3 or 4.
Robbed of a couple Olympics as well.
So, happy for Bergeron, calls it a career, gets to retire. His body can heal a little bit. Let's look at this selfishly from a Red Wings perspective. The Red Wings own the better of their next first-round pick / the one that they own from the Boston Bruins, which is a 2024 top 10 protected first-round pick, or if it's top 10, then it slides to a 2025 completely unprotected first-round pick. So Detroit gets to choose which one they want to send. Now, for this to be a really good pick for Detroit, like, it kind of has to thread the needle. You essentially want Boston to finish 11th in the draft order next season for Detroit to have the best possible option for that pick, and who knows where they'll finish in relation to that pick. But still, Boston, could they be in some trouble here? And could this be advantageous for Detroit?
Their first-line center right now is Pavel Datsyuk.
Wow.
Yeah, this team's in trouble. Not to the point of, I think they're going to be, free falling, and all of a sudden that top 10 lottery pick looks very much an option. I don't think they're that bad. They still have Marchand, Pasternak, 2 great goalies, McAvoy. They're fine. They're not a cup contender anymore, I don't think, unless they solve some problems. But yeah, Bergeron was not only the driver of that team, he was also, known as one of the best leaders in all of sport. So losing a guy like that in the locker room surely can't be beneficial either. I don't know. This is not a short-term, oh my God, we're in trouble for Boston, but you now can clearly see the writing on the wall for what the next 5 to 10 years are going to look like for the Bruins, because they have nothing to speak of in the farm system. The core on the team is aging, and it's at the perfect confluence of Ottawa, Buffalo, and Detroit really hitting the gas on their progression. So now not only does Boston still have to compete with Florida, Tampa, Toronto, I don't think the Bruins are that much further ahead than those other 3 teams. I think Montreal is the only one truly lagging here. So there is a reality I wouldn't call it an all that likely one where Boston's, battling for 6th or 7th this year because, if Detroit takes a step, Buffalo takes a step, Ottawa takes a step, it's not crazy. Now, keep in mind, Boston would have to drop off like 40 points in the standings for that to be even a possibility. But again, they lost Bertuzzi, Taylor Hall, Dmitry Orlov, now Patrice Bergeron, David Krejci. That's a dramatically different team, and they did not bring in a ton of talent to offset it.
I have gone wrong on this podcast over the 8.5 years we've been doing it by betting against Boston multiple times.
This one, the evidence is actually there. Like before, they're getting old.
Yeah.
Now it's like they are losing players.
One thing I will say, though, is teams who have been good for a long time, I find that their drop isn't that precipitous. Like
it's never this rapid.
Because it's going to sound like I'm talking about intangibles, but they have a winning system. They have a winning culture. Those guys know how to battle and win games. And I know it's hard to quantify that and put it into something tangible that you can latch onto, but it's a real thing, especially in hockey. That doesn't just go away overnight. Now, you've pulled out one of the most important cogs in that, in Patrice Bergeron, of course. But as Brad said, they still have a lot of really key players there. McAvoy, Marchand, that the goaltending should still be really, really good. So that doesn't all go away. But I don't know. Like, this might be the point where, like you said, Brad, Boston falters enough and the teams chomping at the heels from behind catch them. It would have to be dramatic for them to fall off, all the way to the bottom. So I'm not projecting that, but no longer are you going to say, yeah, the top three is absolutely Toronto, Tampa Bay, Boston. I could see a shakeup here. So again, as a reminder, the reason we're talking about this is because Detroit owns one of 2 first-round picks next year, either their own or the one that Boston sent them, and it depends on which one Detroit decides to send to Ottawa, and that's part of the DeBrincat trade. And it also depends on if Boston's first-round pick is actually the 2024 pick. If Boston ends up in the top 10 of the draft order in the 2024 draft, then it moves to 2025 unprotected. And Detroit still has the option of sending whichever one they want to. Okay, some other news. Sebastian Aho signs himself a long-term deal. Carolina brings him in for 8 years at $9.75 million, which is notable because it's an 8-year contract for a premier player in the NHL. So thoughts overall on the deal, but also the comparison is drawn a lot to Larkin. Similar if you think they're in the same tier in terms of output, statistics, their role in the team, et cetera, et cetera. So how does that make you feel about Larkin's deal as well as your reaction to the deal?
Man, first-line centers are expensive, aren't they? I don't know. I really like Sebastian Aho as a player. Big fan. So when I saw the contract, my first thought was that's perfectly reasonable. In my head, I've always had him ahead of Dylan Larkin in terms of, quality of first-line center. I think it's a good deal for the player, good deal for the team. My only question here, and it won't matter because he re-signed with the same team, is Sebastian Aho actually that good, or is he a little bit inflated because he plays on such a strong team and such a strong system? Like, would Dylan Larkin be putting up similar numbers if they were switched? I don't know if it would be to the same extent, but I think there's a conversation that they are more comparable than I think a lot of people would think.
Yeah, the question was posed, like, which one would you prefer? And credit to Aho, phenomenal player. I still think I take him like what he brings to the game is, I think, not overrated or underrated. I do think sometimes overlooked. But yeah, you can't deny the fact that system really elevates its players. And that's not just on defense. It's not just like the defenseman making the goalie seem a lot better. There is support on offense as well. So the system overall, I'm sure, does do something to amplify Aho. So I don't think it's crazy to pull Larkin into that tier and make the comparison, especially based on contract. So yeah, it does actually make me feel good about the price that Detroit paid for their first line center, which wasn't cheap. Like, they paid a premium on Larkin, but at no point are you seeing guys in and around him going for way less by any means.
Yeah, it's not like the Red Wings weren't even in the ballpark. I think clearly they were well where they needed to be. And as some of these other contracts start to come out, it should make everybody feel a lot better if they were maybe a little bit hesitant on the dollar amount for Dylan.
Matt Murray. This one's just funny because people are really up in arms about it, and it was kind of coming from a mile away. But the Maple Leafs, obviously perpetually in cap hell, have been forever, will be forever. Somehow, and no one knows how it happened like this, but the Matt Murray trade that they made turned out terrible for them, and hasn't been good, injured, etc.
Is he still hurt from when Raymond ran and tripped and fell behind him?
In and among other things, there was a lot of things that did,
and he was available for round 2 of the playoffs,
whatever that may mean.
But never actually got in.
So, and he's just been hurt his whole career.
Yeah,
I don't know what his injuries are specifically, but I think at this point we can classify them all as permanent and or recurring.
Pretty much. And a lot of people were really up in arms. It's Toronto, cap circumvention, because he said he was ready to, or available to play in the playoffs. And look, I love dunking on Toronto. I really do. It's one of the few things in life that brings me pure unfettered joy. But for this one, it's the players said they're ready to go because they want to compete in the playoffs. I don't think it's a far stretch based on what the threshold has been to stick a guy on LTIR. I'm sure he's held together by paper mache and duct tape at this point.
Doesn't the league send they
investigate.
I'll call it a league doctor.
Yeah.
In to sort of confirm and be this guy cannot play hockey.
Yeah, he does all the same tests, but instead of the little rubber hammer for the kneecap to test the reflexes, he actually uses a hockey stick and whacks it in the shins.
Every time something like this comes up, I always have to laugh that people actually think the player would be willingly in on this cap circumvention. Oh, yes, no, I would totally prefer this over, playing hockey.
Sometimes there would be a situation star player gets hurt in January and takes time off until April and they're rested.
Yeah. Oh, hey, man, can you take an extra 2-3 weeks off just so we can, have that extra cap for the playoffs? I don't think Kucherov or Mark Stone will rush him back, but this isn't that.
No.
This is, hey, you're not going to play hockey to start this year because we need you to be hurt, but I'm not hurt. Oh, but you're hurt, and we're going to put you on LTIR. It doesn't work that way. The player has to be no, yeah, I'm hurt. I am actively hurt.
Hey, the last time you tried to push off the post, you winced in pain and your entire left leg collapsed.
That's why he kept pushing the net off.
Yeah, that got so annoying.
Dude, everything around the Leafs, good or bad, gets annoying.
Yeah, it does.
Right? Oh, God. Only in Leafland could backup goalie who's been perpetually injured for 6 years bring out conspiracy theories when he is injured again.
You almost want them to win, so the narratives around them just move back into the realm of reality or stuff that matters. Are we really talking about their second or third goalie being on LTIR as drama right now?
I don't want them to win.
That's a fair point. You make a good objective argument, and I think you're correct. A couple of signings that are notable. Logan Cooley signs his ELC 3-year deal, obviously, with Arizona. And this one's notable because Logan Cooley was apparently going to go back to college this year.
Yeah, that was a big to-do for a while.
And that was scary for Arizona because people are saying, hey, Logan Cooley can play in the NHL right now.
Logan, we've got a college arena you can play in right now.
Well, that's why he changed his mind, because the big bright lights of the University of Minnesota were getting a little too much for him, so he wanted to scale it down a little bit.
Yeah, the media availability is too crazy in this college arena. I really need to, try to be back in the shadows, so I'll play in the NHL
He pulled a Bo Horvat going from the Vancouver media to the Islanders, which is just a little easier on him. He's like, I'm at that point in my career where I just want some peace and quiet just to enjoy myself with my family, move to a nicer climate to live in. And so, yeah, I'm going to Arizona. Sure, smaller crowds and stuff, but
I understand the logic completely.
It's really good. First of all, really good for Arizona because they get what's going to be one of, if not the most important players in their core playing in the NHL right now. I think he's not quiet, but a genuine candidate for the Calder Trophy this year, depending on how he stacks up against Bedard. And I mean, this is a win for Arizona, a team that is allergic to wins on or off the ice. This is huge for them, and it staves off any conversation of what if Logan Cooley goes 4 years and doesn't sign with Arizona and leaves as a free agent, which absolutely was a fear within the organization, and you can't convince me that it wasn't, because that would have been the most Arizona thing to ever happen.
He's just going to structure his NHL contracts to get him out of there as quick as possible. He goes to his agent, what is the soonest I can have any leverage? And then let's schedule to that.
Well, in all honesty, like, earning potential. Like, if you go back to college for 4 years, like, you have to do some calculations.
Oh yeah,
as a college player who will have some kind of desire in free agency. Okay, you want to go that route? Sure. But how many millions are you giving up now each year? And are you going to be able to make up for that at the end of your college career? So they have agents and stuff to inform them on that. But.
Yeah, you're probably better off taking your entry-level deal as soon as possible, get some signing bonuses in there. Your sponsorships, I would imagine, could kick in as well, because I doubt that the how the NCAA works and how players sort of get paid under the table, I have no idea anymore. So you probably wouldn't get sponsorship dollars
not anywhere close to the NHL.
Not anywhere close to that. So yeah, if you're looking from a financial perspective, I would imagine getting into the NHL as fast as possible would be the most lucrative.
It's also like, you know what? I'm not going to take like a dunking on the Yotes Avenue here. This is his opportunity to make it his team.
He'll play a ton.
Is there any guarantee that they're going to be in Arizona in 2, 3, 4 years? No, but by all rights, this is a team without an identity right now, or at least one that's good. He's able to come in and make it his team. So good for him. I'm excited to watch him. I love Logan Cooley as a player, loved him as a prospect. I'm happy that he's in the NHL. The Calder crop this year is going to be really interesting to see play out. Like, there's a lot of really strong candidates. Good luck making those preseason bets on Calder odds.
Well, you just throw all your money on Connor Bedard, understanding that he's going to be playing 28 minutes a night for Chicago.
That's fair. Yeah.
I don't think they're going to take him off the ice in the power play.
No, they won't.
And they're probably going to ask nothing of him defensively.
Kyle from Chicago won't allow it.
And he's correct.
Another signing that raised my eyebrows, Vladimir Tarasenko, who apparently at one point agreed to a deal with Carolina, and then it didn't actually happen. And then he fired his agent, and then there was deals or offers to him from various teams across the league. Ends up signing a 1-year, $5 million deal with the Ottawa Senators, which is honestly, I think, a win-win, both sides. Ottawa really has nothing to lose. They had to replace some kind of offense with DeBrincat. Do they get him long-term? No. Do I think he'll stay there long-term? Hard to say. Depends on how things go. Tarasenko obviously wants more money and just wants to cash in once the cap goes up and just wasn't happy with what was being offered. Wants to go somewhere and play a full year healthy to show that he still has a lot left in the tank. So gets $5 million for this year, which is nothing to scoff at, and then hopefully gets a little bit of a longer-term deal next year. This one makes sense to me for both sides.
Yeah, obviously Ottawa had the, replace the giant hole that Alex DeBrincat left in their roster. And, Tarasenko's not DeBrincat, but he's good. He can still produce. Not like he used to, but he should be good for 20 to 25 goals. So, losing DeBrincat but replacing him with, the cumulative stats that Kubalik and Tarasenko put up is not that big of a loss. In fact, well, it's only for 1 year. It's probably a gain. But obviously that's not the key part of that deal. But yeah, it's interesting because, Tarasenko could have a lot of outcomes here. With his health history, you look at his performance the last couple of years in St. Louis and the Rangers, and there's a lot of inconsistency here. But there have been a lot of flashes of, he's still that dude. So I am super curious to see, especially because Ottawa, they're a young up-and-coming team with a pretty deep top six. I really, really wonder where Tarasenko's actually slotting in here.
Well, and the other thing is he's won a cup before. I'm sure a young, inexperienced team. They wanted some veteran leadership in there too. He had his disagreements with the staff in St. Louis. So obviously this will be a nice change for him. But yeah, it really is a win-win. Tarasenko gets to play this year. It's only 1 year. Ottawa gets what they need in a player. And then, if it's a good fit, maybe he resigns. Who knows? If not, Tarasenko's timing the cap increase at very well.
Let's feed this into a conversation that has been going on very calmly on Twitter, or should I call it X, for months now. Both sides have been, rational, very normal, definitely not way too online, but Senators fans and Red Wings fans have been rabid, going at each other's throats about which team is better or worse off for this year. And overall, you're looking at the Atlantic Division and you're saying, okay, what's going to go on with these teams that aren't the foregone conclusions to be in the mix? So, take out Boston, Toronto, Tampa Bay, Florida. You have Buffalo, Ottawa, Detroit, Montreal. That's the order that they finished in last year. 91, 86, 80, and 68 points respectively across the four. How are they going to move forward? Because all four teams, I should say, are making steps in their own ways at different speeds. Some are perceived to be, ahead of others, but how do they all match up? What's the order going to be here? Detroit adds some offense into Brinkett. Ottawa replaces it with Tarasenko. Buffalo had a late season surge and it just looks fantastic with Tage Thompson, Dylan Cousins, Dahlin, and Owen Power. There's a lot to be said about these groups, and the actual order is going to be really hard to hammer out. I feel like without shortchanging one group or another.
Understanding that hockey is a very random sport and there's always going to be weird outcomes and, this and that and injuries can affect things. Like Buffalo's right now closer to the Tampa tier than they are the Detroit Ottawa tier, in my opinion. They are so far ahead of the other three. You look at their defense. You look at the left side of their defense alone. Dahlin, Power, Samuelsson. They are set for the next decade on that side of their D, and top end players. The right side, they got some guys coming, but they can always fill it together. In net, Devin Levi looks like the absolute truth, and even Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen's far from a write-off. He's still got a ton of potential. And then up front, like you already mentioned, Tage Thompson, Dylan Cousins, Alex Tuch, Peyton Krebs, JJ Peterka, Matt Savoy,
Zach Benson.
Not only are they good, they're young. They are not leaning on, this team is at no position leaning on anyone old. Their stars in net are young. At every key position on a hockey team, the Red Wings, the Sabres are loaded with young stars. Legitimately stars. I would argue outside of maybe the Devils, there isn't a team positioned better for long-term success than the Buffalo Sabres right now. Now, keep in mind, this is the Buffalo Sabres, and there's always a way they Buffalo this up. So they are far from a guarantee, given who they are as an organization, but they have stable ownership now, stable management, and a good coach, and a stacked roster. I really struggle to see Detroit or Ottawa, at least in the short term, really keeping up with what Buffalo's doing and honestly what they're going to do. I would not be surprised if Buffalo gets a divisional seat in the playoffs this year. I don't think Toronto, Tampa, Florida, and Boston are that much further ahead than Buffalo, if at all.
My thing with Buffalo, though, is they gave up 300 goals last year. In the Atlantic Division, that was only...
Yeah, on the back of Eric Comrie and the ghost of Craig Anderson.
Right. And, Montreal was the only team in the Atlantic Division that gave up more, 307, and Columbus in the other division, but still in the East, gave up 330 because, wow, Columbus. But Detroit gave up 21 fewer goals than Buffalo. Mind you, Buffalo scored 56 more goals than Detroit. I agree with you. Long term, this team is positioned extraordinarily well. And they've had the acquisitions, the draft picks, the way Tage Thompson has come through. Dahlin, anyone who doubted him just doesn't understand the way defense progress over time. Absolutely agree. This team is really, really well positioned long term. I just hesitate to say that they're going to make a colossal jump next season. I could see it happening. I would maybe bet on it to some degree of certainty, but not saying, it's absolutely going to be, they're going to be the one that's going to be head and shoulders above the rest. I do think they're
single season, sure.
But over time, 100% agree. They are the leading contender. If you're gonna lump Detroit, Ottawa, Buffalo, and Montreal together, Buffalo is head and shoulders above them in terms of what they should accomplish.
Yeah, 1,000%. For me at this point, it's not if they take a massive step, it's when. Could it be this year? Sure. Could it be the year after? Sure. I mean, they missed the playoffs by 1 point this year. Everybody talks about Pittsburgh just missing because of that game against Chicago. Buffalo was also right there. They were 1 point behind the team that went to the Stanley Cup final. Just to keep it in perspective, I know hockey's random, but Buffalo, it's not like Buffalo needs to take a massive leap this year to be relevant. If they jump 10 points in the standings, which I think is very reasonable, just simply through the progression of Owen Power no longer being a rookie, another year of Dylan Cousins' progression, another year of a million of their young players' progressions is probably worth 5 to 10 points in the standings. And if that's 10 points,
that's a divisional seed.
They're over 100 points. Like, they do not need to take that big of a step to crack 100. So, yeah, it's hard to not really like what Buffalo's doing in the short term, and more importantly, in the long term. Because as this goes on, I think the tiers have become very clear in the Atlantic in terms of you have your still good but regressing in Tampa and Boston, your good but a lot of uncertainty with their futures, mainly because of contracts in Toronto, Florida. Then you have Buffalo, the big wild card in terms of they could be really, really good. Then you have Detroit and Ottawa battling it out for 6th. And then way down there in the Grand Canyon, you have the Montreal Canadiens.
And they're eating glue.
Yeah.
These teams are having a mid-off.
I have chosen not to partake in the X or Twitter war between Sens fans and Red Wings fans because truly it's embarrassing.
It's so like
a mid-off isn't even apt because they are not in the middle of this division. They are arguing who is the third worst and who is the second worst.
Well, let's talk about Detroit and Ottawa. Let's jump into that fray. Detroit did peel a player off Ottawa in Alex DeBrincat. Ottawa got Dominic Kubalik. Whatever you feel about that trade, Detroit does add a good long-term player in Alex DeBrincat. Ottawa right now is seemingly in the throes of reckoning with, hey, the rebuild's over, even though it very obviously wasn't. But also moving forward with some really big successes. Like Tim Stützle has been, throughout his entire career, his short career so far, fantastic, but just looks phenomenal. Brady Tkachuk has made a lot of people, myself included, have egg on their face in terms of what his impact would actually be. And, is the kind of player that a lot of teams in the league covet. And they're going to get Josh Norris back from long-term injury. Claude Giroux's there. Shabbat and Sanderson, not to mention the Chychrun, who they acquired. Like, there's a lot to Ottawa that's going extremely well. That's a team that genuinely is, like, if you look through the noise of people screaming rabidly on one side of the argument or the other, Ottawa has done quite a bit to make themselves better. Is it at Buffalo's pace? No, I don't think so. But I think they have probably the next best bet on paper by a thinner margin over Detroit in terms of who could jump into that fray.
Ottawa's definitely ahead of Detroit right now, but that's mostly because most of their prospects have graduated.
Yeah.
They don't have a ton left in the system that isn't already up with the big club in terms of impact players, whereas I would argue most of Detroit's future big impact players are not there yet. So for this upcoming season, yeah, I do think Ottawa has an edge, and probably for another 2 or 3 seasons. Again, hockey's random, not saying Detroit can't take them out, but on paper, Ottawa's ahead. Long term, I would argue Detroit's probably got more potential just by the sheer volume of impact players they could have, but a lot of that is predicated on most of these players hitting for Detroit, and we've talked about that. That's the problem with Detroit's rebuild and the way the draft has went is they need to beat the odds in terms of, their prospects hitting. They can't, like Danielson, Kasper, and Edvinsson as a trio can't miss a single one. They all have to hit. They all have to hit in some degree.
Yeah.
And then between, Mazur, Soderblom, Lombardi, they probably need at least 2, which again is not fair to guys who are all taken 3rd round or later. But that's the reality they sit in. Unfortunately, Sandin Pellikka probably can't miss. Kosa definitely can't miss.
I think, hot take, I think they actually have more leeway to miss with Kosa than in terms of the player, not the expenditure of draft capital.
Yeah, that's fair. And obviously, Trey Augustine's not a bad safety net, but that's that Kosa could be their big advantage over Ottawa because Ottawa's got Korpisalo that should play out reasonably well for him, but Korpisalo's ceiling isn't all that high, and his inconsistency is very noted. And if Kosa comes in and turns into a star, that could be the the difference between the two ultimately, if we're talking 5 years down the road. So Ottawa is ahead now, and they have a little more certainty to their future than Detroit does. But if things break the way Detroit needs them to, then I think long-term Detroit's probably looking at a stronger window, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But Ottawa's much closer to hitting their window than Detroit is.
I like the note you made about Ottawa's prospects have graduated. And that's not to be reductive. Like, I really do think Stützle has been fantastic. Obviously, Brady Tkachuk that's his team. Like, there's no minimizing that. But there's been a little bit of a back and forth in terms of, Stützle just had a great season. Then Raymond had a great season. Then Stützle had a great season. So if Raymond takes the big step that we know he can take and it comes next season, then the narrative shifts that much. If the players that the Red Wings brought in, which, it's another big shift in the overall DNA of this team. So it's a big ask to say, yeah, these players are going to come in and mesh extremely well right away. But if they do, that's another big push forward. The prospects change things. Does Kasper break into the roster? Does Edvinsson by the end of the season become a top 4 regular? Like, these are all things that are a big ask in a singular lens, and you want all of them to come together. That's why I say, and Brad says, Detroit comes in just behind Ottawa in terms of what they can put down on paper and in likelihood, but it is not a foregone conclusion that Ottawa will come out ahead of Detroit right now. Like, they are very much battling neck and neck, and in 365 days' time, this narrative could be wildly shifted just based on, players progressing internally on either team.
And both of these teams would be heavily impacted by one of their main components being injured for a long period of time. So, who's going to finish 6th versus 7th could be very well dependent on availability of their star players. But yeah, just looking at like the defensive cores, for example, do I think Ottawa's is better right now? Yeah, certainly. But, if you inject Edvinsson and Sandin Pellikka into Detroit's roster, I start to really have a bit of a thought exercise, in 2-3 years.
Yeah.
I think Detroit would have the better defensive core there. So, yeah, Ottawa's a more realized team, and Detroit still has a ton of potential and growth, I think.
Yeah, it's, I don't know if it's the best way to put it. Ottawa this year is going into the experimental phase, whereas Detroit's future is still theoretical.
Yeah.
Realized, yeah, versus theoretical, that's a good way to put it. Health, I think you're right, Evan. I think health is going to dictate.
Both these teams aren't deep enough to just have the next guy up and they don't miss a beat. I think if we're talking, standings, a couple injuries and both teams are free falling.
Well, that's the one area, at least if we're talking for this specific season, Detroit definitely has an advantage on Ottawa is depth. Yeah. I think Detroit's better positioned to handle an injury. Let's say, in a hypothetical world where Perron and Giroux both get hurt, I'm not that they're equal players, but just hypothetical old guys who could get hurt.
Yeah.
Detroit would be able to fill that gap far better than Ottawa would, because you can almost cut their forward group in half, like in terms of that chasm between their top 6 and their bottom 6, whereas Detroit has the opposite problem, which is still a problem, which is that third and fourth line is still a little too similar to the second line, but at least it makes for easier transitions when stuff goes wrong.
Yeah, the peaks are not as high for sure, but it's not such a steep drop off.
Yeah.
And, we should qualify this all by saying some folks might be thinking, didn't you have criticisms about the Kopp contract to some degree or the JT Compher contract to some degree? And yeah, to some degree, yes, there is some concern about the term, depending on which one of us you're talking about, maybe. But as of right now, those two players should be able to come in and have strong, effective seasons. They're not going to be Tim Stützle out there, either of them. But in a way that's not going to be as flashy on paper, a more solid middle part of your lineup could be what makes a difference. I think what it honestly is going to boil down to, as dumb as it is whose backup goalie is better and which team stays healthier.
A lot more certainty in Ottawa's net as well. I do like their short-term goaltending much better than Detroit's because, I think Husso and Korpisalo, like when they're both on, are very similar. But, yeah, I don't have the faith in Reimer or Alex Lyon that I would in Anton Forsberg, again, who's coming off a very good year.
I don't know. Maybe. It seemed that to me seems like a wash. Like Korpisalo, Forsberg versus Husso's against Lyon, Reimer. I could see that going any direction.
Availability once again.
100%. Best ability. And Montreal, just to give them the time of day here, are they that far behind where it's not going to be a concern if you're one of the up-and-coming teams that they're going to be hot on your heels soon enough?
No, they are that far behind. I really don't like anything that they're doing, which as a fan of the Red Wings is great. You know, Nick Suzuki isn't Dylan Larkin. I don't think he's going to be as good as Dylan Larkin. And right now he is their only solution at center for a while, him and Kirby Dach. And Kirby Dach, you know...
It's a great reclamation project.
Yeah,
there.
I mean, he certainly made that Romanov trade look worthwhile, but he's hot and cold, and they're banking on him being like a true number 2 center. You know, Cole Caulfield and Alex DeBrincat are unbelievably similar players to compare him to the Red Wings. Caulfield obviously being a bit younger, but man, there is not a lot to write home about anywhere else in that organization. Yeah, they got some decent prospects. Reinbacher's obviously pretty good. Caden Gooley on the back end's pretty good. They have Lane Hudson too, and again, he looks like he could be unreal, but until... The question with him has always been, is he a stud? No, he's always been a stud, but is it going to translate to the NHL at his size? He has to be
He's looked really good so far.
Yeah, he has to be Quinn Hughes or it's not going to work in the NHL, and that is very much in the realm of possibility for him.
Yeah.
But far from a sure thing. Montreal's going to run into that issue Detroit has, where they just don't have a superstar. It's just not there.
We'll see how Reinbacher turns out.
Again, I like Reinbacher. I don't think he's going to be a superstar. I like Lane Hudson. I don't think he's going to be a superstar. I like Nick Suzuki. He's not a superstar. Like Cole Caulfield. He's not a superstar. Like the similarities to where Detroit was a few years ago to where Montreal is now is pretty stark.
Lafreniere goes back to Quebec. Ultimate reclamation project, finds his game. It was all the Rangers' fault all along, and he becomes their superstar, leads them to the playoffs.
As much as that would hurt from a Detroit Red Wings point of view, I want that to be true just because New York has annoyed me with winning Kakko and Lafreniere, and neither of them have turned out to be what they should be as players.
It would be hilarious from that perspective.
I think so. Also, Slavkovsky obviously didn't have the season that he wanted to have.
But again, he's still going to be a good player, but he's not going to be a star, like a superstar.
So in terms of standings, yeah, Buffalo, like you were saying at the top, Brad, Buffalo had 91 points. They should get better. Even if they are hit by injury, it would be hard to see them tumble down the order. Ottawa finished with 86, Detroit with 80. Detroit really got hit by injuries at the end, kind of fell off a cliff after, well, right before the trade deadline when they played Ottawa twice, but those teams I still think are neck and neck. Health, goaltending might dictate which one finishes above the other. I don't see a huge chasm between the two. And yeah, Montreal, I gave them the time of day for the sake of the conversation, but they were 12 points behind. So to see that order shaken up would be a pretty big surprise, but I won't rule it out.
I think all the change in the standings in the Atlantic this year is likely coming in the top half of it, not the bottom.
Unless Buffalo moves into it.
That's exactly what I'm thinking. I think Buffalo could jump up to shake things up.
Yeah, that'll be interesting. Okay. Let's get to some other Red Wings news. And we haven't really talked about it because it's kind of been, a wait-and-see situation. But just for the sake of addressing it, Joe Veleno is still unsigned for the Detroit Red Wings. Their only RFA currently who is unsigned. Arbitration is not the case for this one, so he's not part of all those players going through that process right now. Just has to sign the contract. Now, there's plenty of time left, so not raising any alarm bells or anything like that. But July 30th, no contract. Any idea of what you think the contract will be, should be? Any concern, if at all, on your end?
No, none. There's contracts like this seemingly every year with the Red Wings, and every year it gets to a point in like mid to late August where people start freaking out, and every time without fail it gets worked out completely drama-free.
It's probably, this is not based on any information, this is just conjecture, but whenever you have a bottom half of the lineup hold out like this, it could be something so stupid as, he's on vacation, or they're just not concerned about it, or they have things more or less hammered out and they just have to tackle one detail, or they're not holding out but really grinding based on one detail that is to the fans small, but to the team and the player big on principle. So it could be 1 year versus 2 years. And that's the thing that happens a lot with these players. They want 2 years, or they only want one, or the team is big on not going over 1.75 and the player's like, nope, I want 2. Like, stuff that won't move the needle really in terms of the overall cap structure and things like that. But For the players, it's important, and for the team, I mean, we know how Steve Yzerman operates. There is no small contract on this team. Generally grinds most of his guys. Doesn't matter how many times he's driven to on road trips together with them in the car. I think this Veleno situation is probably something like that. Like you're looking at a short-term contract, if not a 1-year deal for what, 1.5 to 2.5, maybe in and around that range, give or take.
It will not be significant either way.
Veleno still has every, opportunity here to seize and control his spot in the lineup. You might be saying he's done that already. I think just with the amount of talent that the Red Wings have added, I don't want to say it's a foregone conclusion. Like if Veleno comes in, let's say he signs, has a terrible camp, and he's outperformed by all like Kostin and Fisher and Berggren and anyone else who might be in that bottom six. Like let's say even Soderblom, he might find himself on the outs and having to work his way back in the lineup. But by all rights, Veleno is still projecting to be Detroit's bottom six center solution long term. Third, fourth line guy. That's probably where he's going to end up if he sticks in Detroit. But we've talked about it time and time again. Is he a massive needle mover? No, but it's better for your third and fourth line centers to be Joe Veleno's long term than it to be, a 36-year-old journeyman, because that's the only thing that you can put there. Or, not try to disparage the guy, but the Red Wings have often had Luke Glendening or Darren Helm
They're
way
basically
too long.
The same player. It's fine.
Yeah, right. So it'll get done. It's not going to be a massive needle mover either way. Okay. It's the offseason. Let's jump into the fun stuff here, which is our overtime segment. Overtime is brought to you by our Patreon supporters, patreon.com/wingedwheelpodcast. If you want to join the Dub Club, again, you get access to our overtime bonus episodes. You get access to our offseason midweek bonus episodes, which are exclusively for patrons. And that way you still get the Winged Wheel podcast twice a week in your ears. The midweek episode for the entire offseason is Patreon exclusive. You also get entered into our giveaways and get access to the Discord. In addition to all of that, you help us support the show. You help support our expanded Winged Wheel podcast content network. Expected by Whom is now up to 2 NHL assistant GMs interviewed on their show. Give them a follow and listen to the show. Sean and Prashanth have done a phenomenal job with Expected by Whom. And you also help us support the Jamie Daniels Foundation through fundraising for them and through initiatives like Winged Wheel Podcast Nights at the LCA in partnership with the Detroit Red Wings. That's all funded by us, and so our patrons are really the ones who make that happen. Okay, let's take some questions from our patrons, and we will start here with Give Wallman the Heart. Says, do you guys think Kasper has a better chance of hypothetically making the team slotted in at first line left wing with Larkin into Brinkett or Raymond, or as a 2C? So which hypothetical scenario is more likely for Kasper to make the team?
This season or long term?
Let's say the season for the hypothetical.
Wing. Neither's happening this year, but wing is the more likely.
Yeah, both are unlikely, but second line center is a big role in the NHL. I mean, Kasper does play a kind of game that I think will translate to the pro game a little bit faster than average, but yeah, second line center is a huge role in the NHL. And they have capable guys there. Between Kopp and Comfer, you're almost better off sticking him at the wing. It's your boy Al says, is everyone on this team destined to make less than Larkin? I've heard you guys talk about the captaincy factor before, but from your last episode, it sounds like Seider will probably make more. It depends. Internal cap structures are really beneficial for teams. Detroit has a history of it. They've done it in the past, and they've often tied it like, no one makes more than Lidstrom or whoever it is. It's really hard to manage those things because right now, Detroit paid Larkin for a lot of years. That will come with the cap raise, but with the cap going up as much as it's going to over the next 2+ years, if Seider comes in and has an all-star season and it gets Norris votes, it might be hard to bring him in under Larkin's number. But if you ask Steve Yzerman that question, the answer will probably be an emphatic yes.
Well, I mean, not to simplify this too much, but outside of Mo Seider, there isn't anyone in the organization likely to be better than Dylan Larkin. So
Lucas Raymond could, but it's not going to be the next contract.
And he's also a winger.
Right, which is a less premium position. That's a really good point. So, yeah, it would be good for the cap structure for Steve Yzerman for that to be the case, but it's going to take some massaging of contracts. Whoever does Detroit Red Wings capology is going to have some work cut out for them. But that, I mean, the negotiations are going to be a grind, which is a big surprise for Steve Yzerman. Brian Vasha says, while in Berlin wearing the podcast t-shirt, I ran into a couple that also listens to the show. That's incredible.
Of all places.
Yeah, that's amazing. Anyways, the Wings continue to get negative reviews on their activity, even with the DeBrincat steal. Does this team need to start out on a heater to get some respect? Thanks. I think so, because they ended last season on a stinker.
That's happened 2 years in a row where they started off strong and then fizzled out. The only difference with last year is they held on a little longer. So, yeah, I don't think how they start's going to matter that much, because they've held playoff spots, in November, December, January, the last couple of years. To get respect, they got to finish, not start. They got to go through a whole damn season without falling off a cliff.
And let's call a spade a spade. People are going to be critical because they brought in Justin Hull, and to some degree they're like, oh, Detroit's big signing was JT Compher, and that's not really fair to JT Compher. He wasn't meant to be the DeBrincat trade, but the DeBrincat trade didn't happen until all of that afterwards. So a lot of people's opinions were cemented. Some of the criticisms are fair and some are not, and it really is going to depend on how this team comes together. Now, we said last season this is a brand new team with a brand new coach, and it's going to take them time to gel, and it took a little bit to click, but Derek Lalonde did a phenomenal job of pulling that team together to be better than the sum of their parts, and that sum wasn't very high. Like, the way they came and played team defense, like, this team all of a sudden played much better defensively. He has more to work with, but he almost has the same task ahead of him this year, so there's pretty much the same kind of qualifier there. Neck says, what's the benefit of keeping Joe Veleno at fourth line center instead of Marco Kasper or another prospect?
Prospects you want to play. At this point, we know Joe Veleno's probably not going to be a top six forward. Kasper probably could be. So it's important for him to play more than 9 minutes a night wherever he's playing.
I'll say this team under Yzerman's direction has shown time and time again that if a guy earns a spot, he gets the spot. So if Kasper does earn it over Veleno, he'll earn it over Veleno. Like, he won't be artificially held down unless, he earns it over Veleno, but then he can't handle the grind of the NHL season. And then what Brad says goes. Like, it's not going to be 11 minutes a night in the NHL. They'd rather have him play 19 plus with the Grand Rapids Griffins. The Jims says, happy almost August, WWP crew. I have an overtime rule change for you to weigh in on. In overtime, 3-on-3, there's no offside. It would end the constant zone exit to maintain possession. Wow, I hate that. You like it. I know you like it.
Whatever gets rid of the stupid regroup bullshit.
I do hate the regroup, too. I'm wondering if they need an over and back rule in overtime. I don't like the idea of getting rid of offsides. Like, that's, to me, that just changes the game fundamentally.
What are we going to review then? Goaltender interference?
Let's just get rid of goalies.
Brad's making a lot of enemies. He's alienated defensemen. He's alienated goalies. What do you think of the proposed rule?
They are my two biggest enemies, so that is perfectly okay by me, Ryan.
That's right. As a cherry picker, they are your two biggest enemies.
As a lifelong all gas, no brakes forward.
This man only sees zone entries. There actually aren't enough.
Talking about theoretical stuff, that's the defensive zone for me. In beer league.
Okay. So would you prefer to, what do you think of the rule change? Get rid of offsides in OT?
I think there's other solutions I would try first, but yes, I would prefer that over how it's currently played.
Okay.
I'm indifferent.
You? Indifferent?
That, if it's going to overtime, that's way past my bedtime anyway, so I'm not watching. Doesn't matter.
This is a little bit of a fun one. Cody says, what's your favorite video game of all time? That's
wow,
tough.
I need to go last.
Yeah, that's exceptionally tough. But I have a lot of video games that I've really loved. I probably need to think for a long time before I answer this. I'll say whatever I played where all of my friends were playing at the same time, like, those are the games that I really treasure the most. And were they the best games? No, but I just remember you always log on, you always play with your friends. And so for us, I think the first time, I think Modern Warfare 2 and then Call of Duty Black Ops, like, those two we played, I think, just endlessly, or maybe it was Black Ops 2. I love those, just love playing with my friends. I don't even know if I like the games, honestly. I really hate playing the Call of Duty games. I think they're terrible. We don't play them anymore, so I don't buy them, but Like whatever games me and my friends were all playing at the same time. For a hot second there, like early seasons, it was Fortnite. And then we grew out of it and stopped playing that. But yeah, anything that all of my friends are playing.
I know what mine is.
What is it?
It's Diablo 2.
Yeah, I was going to say, you're a big Diablo guy.
That was one of the first games Diablo 1 was one of the first games I ever played when it came out in 1995. Diablo 2 came out in 2000, and then the expansion in 2002. I still play it.
I know Brad, it's Pong.
Yeah.
Do you even have an answer to this?
I have 2.
Okay.
And they're from the same era as Evan. To obviously give it away. NHL 98 and Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2.
Oh, Pro Skater 2 is such a good answer.
That was a jam.
I 100%ed that game. Like, you remember when it got to the point of so obsessive, you had to complete every gap in the game?
Yeah.
I did that. I forget which one it was, what level, but there was a gap that took me about 2 months to finally hit.
Yeah. Pro Skater 2 is up there. It's got to be top 3 for me. That is a fantastic answer. Wow. Weird games, like weird niche games when I was like a little kid. 2 that I played, which probably don't hold up, but I loved was, speaking of, love Pro Skater 2, so I like skateboarding games. It got gifted to me. Disney's Extreme Skate Adventure had no business being as good as it was. Also, the Harry Potter Quidditch game on PlayStation 2.
Well, don't look at me. I was an Xbox guy.
That game, again, had no business being as good as it was at the time for me.
Man, I still remember, this has got to be like going back to like 93, 94. EA Sports Talk Baseball for Sega. It was one of the first video sports games that had commentary. So it was like a big deal. And I remember playing that thing over and over because I would have only been like 6 or 7 when that thing came out. So it was probably the first sports game I really got into because I think that came out before NHL 94 did. So I kind of went backwards from how most hockey guys did.
And for those of you who are saying, wow, none of you answered the NHL games, it's like,
I said NHL 98.
No, but like,
which one was the one? Maybe it was 99, where if you like pressed like 2 buttons when you did a slap shot and it went in, the net would go on fire.
Oh,
and it was
I know what
it
you're
was 3D.
about.
It was 3D. Maybe it was NHL 99.
I feel like that was after 98, yeah. Was it even an NHL game or was it like one of those like Blades of Steel type things?
The Red Wings prospects just did it at the prospect tournament. They played that game. And Keenan Draper played as Chris Draper.
That's hilarious. Yeah.
They played whatever that game I'm thinking of. They played that game. I think it was NHL 99.
03, 06, and 10 I remember liking, but it just turned into, EA rehashed the same game every year and then stopped really playing it. Dylan Larkin's Nana says, rapid fire, only answer over or under. First, Mazur plays 30 games in Detroit this year.
Under.
I'm going to go under as well. 2, DeBrincat scores 33 goals.
Over.
Under.
Over.
I think my prediction was 34, so I kind of have to stick with it.
3, Gostisbehere has 17 power play points.
Oh, man.
I'm going to go under.
God, that depends so much on what unit they play them on. I'm going to say under.
I'll go over.
Okay. Carzone 13 says, being that you are all hockey players or have been, which Detroit Red Wings player would you want to step into the role of, or what player do you see your style matching up with the most, also league-wide, if that is relevant?
Oh, man, style.
Style? None of them.
So there were growing up in the 90s, there was one very specific player I molded my game after, but he did not play for the Red Wings. So who?
Pavel Bure?
Yeah.
Wow, I was kind of answering jokingly.
No. Yzerman was my idol, but I wanted to play the game of hockey like Pavel Bure. He was the most exciting player to watch in the 90s, which was when I was forming everything. I guess the closest Red Wing to that would probably be Sergei, maybe Pav, in different ways than Bure, but that extremely quick, skilled north-south game. Because that's where I'm better off the rush than the cycle. I love coming through the neutral zone with a full head of steam.
I'm Derek Meach. I don't know. Is there a defenseman who could skate really well but not shoot for shit from the blue line? That's me.
Oh, the Red Wings have had hundreds of them.
Thousands. Literally thousands.
But I shoot right.
Shoot right. That narrows the list.
Yeah, it does. Evan, I don't know if you guys know this, actually played defense.
I did, yeah. I don't know who my answer is.
You a Jake Wallman guy?
Yeah, maybe.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe a little bit.
You have Wallman vibes, but Wallman seems way more outgoing than you.
I'm just always tired. When
I was just saying, I feel like Wallman skates more than Evan ever would have.
Yeah.
Who is that like calm defenseman that you kind of never noticed? I feel like that's Evan, just out there for the vibe.
Nick Lidstrom.
Oli Mata.
You know what? Oli Mata is right.
Yeah, but I clap bombs and
vibes are
and yeah,
other things.
Oli Mata, Evan Lobsinger, vibes are high. Outgoing, not so much.
All right, last question here from Todd McTavish says, you've mentioned that we have a league average first line and then 3 third lines. Would placing Kopp and Comfer on the same line with Perron or Raymond on the other wing make up a league average second line?
Well, you don't have a league average first line unless Raymond's on that first line. So that's not an option. So if you're talking Kopp, Comfer, Perron as the second line, no, that's still a substantially below average second line.
Yeah, like I'm not saying that couldn't
not substantially,
work as a comp.
but it's
not a good NHL second line.
No.
I'm not saying that couldn't work as a combo. Like you might see it at some point if someone comes in and takes a third line center spot, or Kopp or Comfort aren't working out there for one reason or another. But you don't solve Detroit's, you have 3 second lines hypothetical or a problem that we've stated that they have without just adding better talent. Like there's no other combination of it other than bring in more talented guys, which seems ungrateful because the Red Wings just brought in Alex DeBrincat, but it's more of a testament of how far you have to go to make a competitive team. Okay, we are in the throes of the offseason. We're going to wrap this up and jump into our Patreon exclusive overtime bonus episode. So we'd like to thank you all so much for tuning in. Some news items for next week. Next week's episode is going to come on Monday night. We're not going to be recording on Sunday. We're going to be recording on Monday, so it's going to be a day delayed. Also, the midweek episode for this week, again, for the rest of the offseason, will be Patreon exclusive, so stay tuned for that to come your way around Wednesday or maybe Thursday. So again, if you're a patron, you get those bonus episodes, and our next main episode is coming on Monday night, so that'll be Monday, August 7th. We'd like to thank all of you so much for tuning in, all of you for listening, whether you're a new listener or old. We appreciate you so much. If you want to help support the show and can't contribute on Patreon or not interested, another way you can support is by leaving us a rating wherever you get your podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, etc. Those ratings really help, as well as subscribing to the show and tell a friend. That means a lot to us. Speaking of Patreon, we'd like to thank all of our patrons, especially our name-level supporters, Arjun Shanker, Yves Bartels on behalf of the Sarah Grand Foundation, Aikfer, Samuel Soderholm, Raymond's Missing Tooth, Icon, Brad's Lord and Savior, Bradley Cleveland, Glenn Brabham, Keenan O'Donohue, Yanni Burgers, Meals on Wheels, Matthew M. Rice. On behalf of the Mooseheads, I apologize for Ferg Zadina and probably McIsaac, Croner's Left Knee, Admiral Matt S. of the Cheesebag Navy, Babe Landeskog, Buck the Suck Eyes, Carl Bertanen Aluski, Carzone 13, Citizen High Five, Clip Clop Nene, Connor Scovey, Cookin' with Kosa, Coyote season tickets in anywhere but Tempe, Craig Kibble, Denny's Gamer Girl, Derek Enstam, DJ Denton, Don't Say This Is a Guy Challenge, failed, Exquisitine Buble Schwinslow, Give Blood Fight Probert, Hockeytown Love, Hockeytown Matt, Hassam Al-Qassem, Jay Gollum, Jacob Turner, Joel Miranda, Kalen Wood, King Tone, Larkin the Cat, and Raymond walk into a bar, Marcus, Marlon Winchester, brand new name level supporter, welcome Marlon, Matt McKay, Michael Edlund, Mitch Collins, brand new name level supporter, R.A. Red 3, Ryan Hubbard, Scott Martin, that's what I appreciate about you, Wallman's Elite Dancing D, Iserplan Stan, General Andy Bohan of the Cheesebag Army, Sam Bankson, Adam Rose, Big Cheese, Brad Simmons, Brian Vasha, Captain Antonio Gracias of the United Federation of Cheesebags, Chuck Buffchest, the Tarpless Goon, Commander Ben Barron of the Cheesebag Space Force, Connor Leighton, Corey Prida, Kringleberg, brand new name level supporter, welcome Kringleberg, Darren Fick, Frank Stanley, Gene Sullivan, Go Green, Go White, Griffey Boy, Henrik Robert Deeks, I'm from Waterloo where the vampires hang out, I'm Ryan Hanna, and Jonathan Erickson was a generational talent, damn you, whoever did that, Instructions unclear, Cheesebag no longer fresh, James Laporte, James Pridemore, Jeremiah Dobo, JM Rhapsody, John Evans, derogatory, John Ingalls, Josh Yelton, Kevin McCracken, Quaz, Linda Hull, Matt K. Cannon Fodder, the Cheesebag Army, Maximilian, Melissa Erickson, Norris Sider, Ophelia, Steven, Tatarsauce, the Hodag, the Hat123, Winging It in San Diego, new name level supporter, and your second favorite patron. Thank you all so very much. We'll talk to you in a few days.
Thanks for tuning in to the Winged Wheel Podcast. Be sure to check out wingedwheelpodcast.com, where you can subscribe to the show on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You'll also find links to other ways to support the show, such as Patreon, official podcast apparel, and more. And don't forget to follow the show on Twitter at Winged Wheel Pod. And of course, the hosts at Brad Crisco, at Ryan Hanna WWP, and at Hockey Town Evan.